This, folks, is inflation. If you were at an auction, watching everything get bid up and bought, and then the auction was stopped, and someone walked in and gave everyone at the auction, every single person there, another $1,000. What do you think would happen after that? Would the prices or the sell prices be higher of all the items because everybody in there has an extra $1,000? Pretty interesting to think about. Or what if someone walked in at that same auction in the middle of it and handed not everyone $1,000, but a few people $1,000? Maybe the richest ones that were already at the auction just handed them an extra $1,000, and everyone else still had the amount of money, same amount of money in their pockets. What do you think would happen with prices then? Would they still go higher? This, folks, is inflation. Inflation, defined, I guess, in the textbooks, is an expansion of the money supply or expansion of the monetary supply. So every currency out there, except for Bitcoin and gold, can accomplish this task of giving money to someone in the auction without any effort whatsoever. Look what the US government just did during the recent crisis. I don't want to get X-nayed on YouTube. How everyone just got checks of money in the mail. Where did that come from? Well, that was an expansion of the money supply. And that money came out of thin air. Or, in more older terms, was literally printed. Most money that expands the money supply is just zeros and ones on a computer. So this is inflation. Another example of inflation would be if let's shrink the whole world into one small town. And that small town, let's say, has 500 people in it, and they have dollars. And they're conducting commerce. You know, there's businesses, people are, selling things to each other, performing tasks for each other, or other services, and money's changing hands. And with time, people will save some of that money, but those people will discover that that money will buy them more given enough time. So it would buy, let's say, 4 bottles of pop. Now it'll buy 5 bottles of pop 2 or 3 years down the road. Why is that? Because people are efficient. Human beings are efficient. We apply our ingenuity to make things better and cheaper given enough time. That's called deflation. And that would be prices coming down, and your money essentially buys you more. There's a huge incentive in a deflationary environment to save. Deflation, contrary to what the media says, is good. Prices go down, your money buys you more. Your money represents your hard work and effort. There's a book called The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth, and down here it says, Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. Great read, pretty short, pretty quick read, but there's a lot of nuggets of truth in there. Back to my small town example. All right, let's say a couple of people in this small town of 500. Remember, we struck the whole world into this town of 500 people. And a couple of people get together and they figure out how to print money. And so they got this printing press. And this printing press, prints the money. And it prints them with very little effort. They can print as much as they want. But they also know if they print too much, people will catch on. Maybe they can print as much as they want, but they can't spend as much as they want. So let's say they print a whole gob of money, stuff it in their closet, and they just start to spend the money more liberally, but not enough for people to catch on. So what happens? They go down to the store, they have other services done for them. Maybe they get a maid or a butler, and they buy extra things, maybe get an extra car, and no one's really catching on. And these people are going out with their fake money that they didn't work for or produce any goods or services for into this little economy. And that money is starting to float around, that fake money, but nobody can tell the difference. And after a while, people start to notice a demand. Your store owner might say, well, for some reason, I'm selling more things off the shelf. There's more demand for bottles of pop or whatever it be. And they say, well, it's a supply and demand. You hear that all the time. So demand is increased. And supply has stayed the same. So what's going to happen to prices? Prices are going to go up to meet that demand. So given enough time, this money's floating around in this little teeny economy, prices are going to start to rise. And they're going to rise faster than human ingenuity and human efficiency can keep up as far as deflation. So the deflation is not keeping up with the inflation. And there's no check on this inflation. There's nothing to keep it down other than the fact that people might start to catch on. So when people finally catch on, it's usually too late, and they realize that their money that they saved and they worked so hard for is their money in their bank account or even under their mattress does not buy them as much as they had expected. This describes our environment today. A few people at the top get the freshly printed money, and the majority of it, and the rest have to suffer the consequences. And as this money, so if you recall 2020, a lot of new money entered the economy. It takes a while for it to start to take effect. So here we are 2 years later. I think I started to feel it about a year into it, but we're all really feeling it now, especially with food prices. One example, I eat a lot of popcorn. And so I would buy popcorn by the 50-pound bags. And that used to cost me $26. And now it costs me roughly $50 for the same amount of popcorn. So in my world, if that's representative of my food, my inflation is approximately 100%. It doubled the price. So all my hard-earned money now does not buy me as many goods. Okay, that's fine and dandy. Inflation's been around for a long time, just not this bad, at least in this country. And we move along in time, and well, things start to inflate. And it's kind of like the opposite of compounding interest. You've got, compounding interest, your money builds on itself. So you had $5 and then you get, let's say 10% of $5. And then now you got $5.50, and now you can get 10% of $5.50. And now we go up higher and higher with compounding interest. Well, that's great if you can get that in real life, but if we're talking inflation, it's the kind of the opposite. Now you have, let's say you have $50, and then there's 7% inflation. Well, that's going to compound the next year on top of that $50. So what's happening is your $50 is shrinking in value. And by that I mean the amount of stuff or things you can buy with that $50 shrinks and shrinks and gets smaller and smaller. That's why very few things, if any, these days cost a penny. There's just, inflation has gotten away so far that a penny just does not buy you much, if anything at all. So holy cow, this is happening. What do we do? Inflation's a bad thing. Well, the first thing we do is we got to understand it, and that's why I'm making this video. Inflation, we need to get a little bit of history on it. So inflation's been around. It's what ruins a currency. The Romans, way back when, they had gold coins that they circulated around, and they needed to pay their armies. They're out and about conquering. So, soldiers don't work for free. Even the soldiers of today don't work for free. And so the Romans needed to pay for all the pillaging they were doing. Now, granted, they probably, when they conquered, they probably got some goods and, probably even gold, that they could use to offset some of that. But eventually, given enough time, it's going to catch up with you. So what they would do to pay their armies is it's called gold clipping or coin clipping. And you've probably heard of it. The Romans would shave off a little bit of the gold off their coins and then melt them down and make new coins with them. Well, the people started to catch on. Hey, this coin's smaller than this coin. So what they started to do was put ridges in there, and so they could tell if it had been clipped or not. Well, and even today that tradition has persisted. If you look at a quarter, there's the ridges on a quarter. Perhaps that's where why those are there. I don't think they serve any purpose for us this day and age. So the next thing the Romans had to do after the people would catch on is they would melt the gold down and put, I don't know, lead or zinc or some other cheap metal in there, and then restamp the coins, and that would inflate the money supply. So it got more pernicious with time. They had to get sneakier and sneakier to inflate the money supply. Well, eventually it got so inflated that people were realizing that this doesn't buy me as much as it used to. And then what does that do? You start to lose confidence in the currency. And that's how a currency fails. People, as a mass, they don't want it anymore. It's garbage. Does that happen in the world today? Oh, you betcha. You betcha. And yes, we're on that path. Some people say there's a time frame, usually 50 years to 75 years or even 100 years on a currency. We're meeting all of that this day and age. Every government on earth has a currency that is inflatable. And they can all print money ad infinitum with very little effort. And they're not backed by gold. Gold had the special quality that it's really hard to print, for our purposes of our discussion. If you wanted to print gold, you had to go mine it or steal it or conquer someone. It required a great amount of effort to inflate gold. In fact, stealing it wouldn't really inflate it. It would add to your coffers, but not to the overall gold supply. So to add to the overall gold supply in circulation, you'd actually have to mine it. And so that, yes, gold in that sense does get printed. It does have an inflation rate. But central banks across the world have found a way to control gold such that they can control the price. Because if they can control the price of gold, then people will make a correlation to their currency, like the dollar or the pound or whatever it be, and not lose their confidence. So if it gets away on them, then that's a signal that they're losing confidence in the currency. So gold, back in 1933, gold was, clear back in the United States history, we did use gold, like John D. Rockefeller. Back in that time frame, they used dollar denominated gold currency. I'm not sure exactly what the currency was back in that time frame. But fast forward to 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, it basically gave an entity, a group of people, the right to print money. So our money was technically backed by gold at that time. It, if you look at a bill from that time frame, it would say at the top of it would say gold certificate or silver certificate at the top. If you look at maybe at the top of this $5 bill right here, it says Federal Reserve note. Well, back in the day, it would say silver certificate or gold certificate, meaning you could take that piece of paper. It really did mean something. You could take it to what was called the gold window, and the governments at that time had control. They put all the gold in one spot. It wasn't in like a bank vault, owned by private citizens. It was a vault owned by the government. They would take it, and you get, for a small fee, you could exchange that piece of paper for a real piece of gold or silver. And that's called a gold standard. But what if you start to print more pieces of paper than represent the gold back in the vault? That's inflation, and that's actually called fractional reserve banking. That is what the temptation has always been with gold and governments. No matter what they do, no one can resist the temptation. They did for a long time, and it was a great growth period. The industrialization of the world, it did, especially in the United States. It was a great period of time and growth based off of that gold backing. That's called sound money or sound currency. You know, fast forward a little, you know, later in time, you know, we got the Spanish flu epidemic, and we got the start of World War I in 1918. I find it extremely curious that the Federal Reserve is created, and a few years later we start to have World War I. Because what do you need to pay for a war? Well, you need a lot of money. But if you don't have, you know, real money, like money backed by gold, versus, you know, plain old pieces of paper, it's really hard to have a war because people can feel it. You know, the citizens of that country can feel the tax on them. Inflation becomes a hidden tax, and it's basically the government stealing your hard-earned money via the value of what it represents. So keep that in mind. We can fast forward to 1933 now, with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, becomes president. And I can't remember like where that was in his presidency. I'm pretty sure it was at the beginning of his presidency, where in 1933 he issued a decree, I want to say 6102, where it became illegal for Americans to own gold, which in the land of the land of the free and the home of the brave, that country, our country, the United States, it was illegal to own gold. Now, I've asked some of the older citizens around me, my grandma included, you know, they're in their 80s. Was this, you know, was this talked about when you were a small child? And they have no clue that it really even happened. And the only thing I can conclude is that people just got used to the convenience of carrying around this piece of paper and not exchanging it for gold. And, you know, at some point in there, I think they probably closed the gold window to regular citizens. You couldn't take $5 and just exchange it for gold. So what FDR did was he said, all right, everybody turn in your gold. It was a $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison. So nobody remembers it, but nonetheless, it was a law. So, and then they could just print these pieces of paper for as much as they, you know, ad infinitum, as long as the people didn't notice. Oh boy, you know, so now we got inflation, you know, and and I don't know how he set the gold rate. You know, some things I've read is that FDR would wake up in the morning and ask his advisor, you know, what's it going to be today? So they set it at, I think, $25 per ounce of gold. You know, keep in mind it's at like $1,900 today per ounce. And then in a while later, a few months later, you know, it'd be like in the $30s per ounce. So he was devaluing that awfully fast, you know, so very, very scary times for those that lived there. Maybe they didn't even know it, you know. Fast forward a couple years and we've got more wars. We've got World War II, then you got Vietnam, you got Korean Wars, and, you know, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch, but, all those have to get paid for somehow. Somehow they got to get paid for. Well, the only way to do that is to really print money, because the citizens of each country will not stand for very much true taxation to fund a war, because wars are inherently, unproductive, at least for the majority of citizens of countries. So that's kind of where we're at today. In 1971 is like the next biggest date in history, where after World War II, a bunch of countries got together and said, okay, we're going to denominate everything in dollars. We're going to store our actual gold. I think the other countries, and the United States were kind of backed by gold as far as a whole country's concerned. But as far as the citizen exchanging, I don't think that was happening by that time frame. So we had an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement. We did not hold up to our end of the bargain, where in that bargain was other countries could bring their currency to us, and they could either get dollars for that currency or gold, and theoretically it would have been one and the same. Well, other countries start seeing all our wars going on, and they're like, well, how are they paying for that? So they get suspicious and they start calling on the gold, and a lot of gold starts leaving the United States. Naturally, we either ran out of gold, no one knows, because Fort Knox has never been audited to my knowledge, so it's anyone's guess if there's any left in there or not. But we said, okay, we're we're closing the gold window. I can't remember Nixon's words, something about the speculators are causing all this trouble, and we got to turn it off from them, which is really the United States reneging on the deal we'd made with other countries. I think France even parked their aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, in New York in protest. Surprisingly, no war came out of that. Perhaps because there was no gold to go after, even if they had come in and fought us for it. So, now nothing's backed by anything, and now we have a whole foreign exchange trading market, that everything floats, there's nothing stable. If everything was backed by gold, there would be no Forex, no foreign exchange as far as the currencies are concerned, so that's a huge deal nowadays. Foreign exchange, that's a big industry. I think it's one of the biggest industries out there. So inflation is taking place all over the place. But what causes it? What causes it day in and day out? Yeah, we had this, crisis a year or two ago, and other crisis, 08, 09, that stuff pops up, bail out the banks, and big bunch of printing occurs, and but we've always had inflation. And growing up, I had always thought of inflation as this thing that nobody knows about. You can't quite explain it, and it's kind of bad, but we can deal with it, almost like it's this needed thing, and this isn't taught in schools. Nobody teaches this. What the heck is inflation? Why do we have it? So here's the reason. Here's why we have inflation day in and day out. And it's going to kind of make you mad because you participate and I participate in dragging out this inflation in the creation of it. So, and it's called fractional reserve banking. And so fractional reserve banking has to do with going and getting loans. So if you go down to the bank and you need $200,000 for your house that you want to buy, and so you put down whatever down payment, but you get your $200,000 to go buy the house. So where does that $200,000 come from? And I think the natural human being, you will think naturally that $200,000, okay, a bunch of people are depositing their money in the bank, and this bank is loaning me back that money that's deposited, and he's paying those guys an interest rate for doing that, and I get the money, and I'm going to go build my house and make payments on it. Well, in a real world, that would work, and trust me, interest rates in that world would not be near as low as they are now. So what happens is you deposit your money into a bank, so does everybody else, and then that bank can turn around and lend money out at a fractional reserve rate. Now, the Federal Reserve sets the fractional reserve rate. And what do I mean by that? It means the rate at which they can fractionally send out the money. So an example would be if you deposit $100 and the fractional reserve rate is 10 or 10%, which is what I think it is right now. Maybe there isn't one. It feels like there's not one anymore, but there should be one. The fractional reserve rate is 10. So that means you deposit $100 and that bank can now create out of thin air $100 or $90 to lend. So they kept 10% and lent out 90. And they created that $90 out of thin air. Holy cow, So now when you go get your loan, that money was printed out of thin air. So that's inflation, right? That adds to the inflation. So that's why we're a debt-based society, if you've ever heard that term, is because you have to take on debt to get out more creation of new money. So this happens day in and day out. That's why we always have, 2-3% inflation, and it devalues your money over time. That's why saving is losing. So have you ever heard, maybe Robert Kiyosaki has said savers are losers? That's why. So we've got this huge problem in this country with inflation, but we're not the only one. Every country in the world today has a fiat or fake currency that they can inflate ad infinitum whenever they want and however they want. The only possible exception would be El Salvador, who just a year ago not even a year ago, I think it was September of 2021, maybe I'm getting my dates wrong, very recently made Bitcoin legal tender. Now, El Salvador has done such a horrible job in the past of managing their own currency that it's always gone to pot, and so they just switched and they just go on the dollar. Which that means they really get the short end of the deal, because when the US government prints money, it's going out to the US government citizens. So the El Salvadorans, they don't get any benefit from that. So they really get the short end of the stick. But they've also made Bitcoin legal tender. So given enough time, it'll probably switch over completely to Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is volatile. Bitcoin's going to have to get high enough where it stops being so volatile to be of use. But however, people are transacting in Bitcoin down there. But the dollar is, I'm guessing, and I would like to take a trip down to El Salvador, but the dollar is what is the unit of account. So everything's denominated in dollars, and then it's probably converted to Bitcoin when you go to check out, instantaneously. So, huge problem globally. Everything's teetering on the edge right now of collapse, and it could last another 10, 20 years, who knows? But for me, I don't like my money to get debased and it's being done by decisions of other people that I have no control or power over, nor do I want control or power over them. My point is, it's out of my hands. My money that I work so hard for, that value of it, is just disappearing into thin air. Someone else is stealing that, literally stealing that. Inflation is a pernicious tax that no one talks about and the government doesn't tell you about. And that's how we fund all our wars. That's how we fund Medicaid, Medicare. All the great government programs out there. How do you think they're paid for? It's paid for by money printed out of thin air. That's just all there is to it. Inflation is bad. We should care about it. You should care about it. It's why things get expensive. If you allow human ingenuity in a sound money system to do its thing, things will get cheaper. And as Jeff Booth says in his books, will tend toward free given enough time, because of the ingenuity of humans to make things better, cheaper, and even faster. Look at what human ingenuity does anyway, despite inflation. How cheap do all of our electronics and tech get over time? Or even, not right now, but if you look at gas prices from a year or two ago, they've all relatively remained more or less stable within a certain range. And how does it do that despite the inflationary forces? Well, it's because the producers get better and better at exploring for the crude oil and better at refining it. They get, human ingenuity takes over to make things cheaper. So, all in all, remember this: inflation is bad, Bitcoin is good. My next video, I'm going to talk about why Bitcoin can fight inflation and why you should care about that and even buy some. So like and subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, please leave them. I'll read them and get back to you. And I'm looking to find my first person to interview, another Bitcoin nobody. So if you think you're a Bitcoin nobody, please leave a note in the comments or DM me on Twitter at Bitcoin_nobody. And maybe we can connect, if not in person, but at least electronically. So thank you.